Hi, I'm Liz from the Missouri Star Quilt Company. Today I'm going to show you how to make the Wire-Frame Tote Bag with this great pattern from Fat Quarter Gypsy. The wireframe sits inside this clever pocket and can carry all your favorite goodies. Let's get started. So to make our wireframe tote, we're going to need a pattern. This is from the Fat Quarter Gypsy, and the wireframe tote pattern makes one of 3 sizes. Today we'll be using the large tote frame. You'll need an outside fabric, a lining fabric, and a pocket fabric. We're going to use a lot of clips today, and then for our handles we'll be using Tulip Pink webbing by Renaissance Ribbons. You'll need hook and loop tape, and we're going to use a unique fusible foam stabilizer from Interfoam Plus. As you can see, this one was designed for this project. So to make this bag, because it is not our pattern, I'm not going to be able to give you all the measurements and details, but I'm walking you through how we make the bag. And there's a lot of steps, but it's not hard. So the first step is to cut all your pieces, and that includes the foam. And you can use regular batting for this, but this double-sided fusible foam is awesome for this project. It gives a little bit more body. And so when you cut your size for, in this case, the large tote, you're going to mark your middle, and then you're going to mark a crease where the bag will actually stand up. And she gives all the instructions in the pattern for how to measure that depending on what size tote you're making. Once I've got this done, I'm ready to start the fabric part. The fabric is going to be cut a little bit larger than the foam so that we can piece it together. And it's going to come in 2 pieces, which we're going to seam right down the center and then press open. Then she asks us to fold over 1/4 inch on each side and stitch that down. So I'm going to show you how I do that, because you can get in there with the iron, but I find that I burn my little fingers. So my trick is to eyeball 1/4 inch. It does not have to be perfect. It's a very forgiving pattern. And I'm just going to run my fingernail along that. And if that sound gives you the heebie-jeebies, I'm sorry. But I found this is a really easy way to set a finger press of that. And you can see here, I'm going to fold over and make sure that seam lays on top of itself and isn't starting to skew down one side. And I'm just going to finger press all the way down the side, and then we'll stitch that down. And as you can see, I've done that on one side already. So do this on both sides. You don't need to do that on the top and bottom. Okay, so now that it's finger pressed, I'm going to come back and I'm going to sew, and she says 1/8 of an inch. That also does not have to be perfect. So I'm just going to kind of eyeball the center of this 1/4 inch and stitch right down the center of that to set this so that there'll be a nice even seam on this other side. I'm going to show you a little trick to this too. I'm not going to start right at the edge. If I start right at the edge, I have a very high likelihood of that little edge going down into the machine. So what I'm going to do is start about 1/2 inch away from the edge, back stitch, and then stitch forward. And since you do that quite a bit on this bag, that trick worked for me really well. So I'm starting about 1/2 inch, and I'm going to back stitch all the way back. And now I can stitch forward, and it doesn't get caught. So I'm just going to run down the side of this, and then we'll do the next step. And you can sew right off the edge, and then we're good to go. The other thing that I want to point out is that I've used a fabric, this really cute fabric with these lemons and this kind of gold sheen. You guys know I'm a fan of the sparkly. This is a non-directional print, or at least it could be argued that there's not a direction because it's got a great toss to it. If you have a directional print, you want to make sure that when your 2 pieces are coming together, the bottom of both is at the seam so that your direction faces upward correctly when your bag stands up. So I hope that makes sense. You want to make sure that your top is this open piece for both directional sides of the fabric. So then once you have this, we're going to press this to the foam. And that looks a little something like this. I'm going to line this up and then flip it over and press down from the fabric side. So remember I said that the fabric's cut a little bit larger. Even with folding over your 1/4 inch, the 1/4 inch should overhang past the foam. So it should look just like that. That means you did it right. And it's going to come all the way up to this top edge and this bottom edge. Those are going to be open and raw, and then you'll have finished edges on the sides that overhang the foam. So once I kind of press this all out, you can add some clips to the corners and sides to hold it in place. And then when you flip this over, you're going to smooth it out, and you're going to start from the center. One more trick to pressing this and making sure it's even and doesn't go one side or the other is because you have this center seam, you can line it up with your marked seam. So as you can see, this is off a little bit. I'll move this over so that my center seam of my fabric lines up with the seam marking that I made for the center. And I'll do the same on both sides. So you can see here's my center seam, here's my marked center on my foam. And then when I start pressing, I'm going to press from the center outward. So I'll smooth this and then press according to the manufacturer's instructions for your product. If you're using batting, you can use a fusible fleece or something that helps to attach this. You can use whatever works for you. And again, it's not super long because we're not trying to press all the way through the foam, just to adhere the batting, or the foam rather, to the fabric for the outside. So you can see that's adhered really nicely. So I'm going to jump ahead for just a second, because your next step is to then mark and quilt this outside. So once it's all pressed to the foam, we marked those creases, we marked our middle. I then went ahead and marked lines that I'm going to use for sewing the quilting. This was a great hack that I had noticed for the first time in her pattern, and what she mentioned was that the foam's on the inside. You can draw all over this and then just follow those lines for any quilting that you like. So in this case, I did a couple of angles, and this will hold together really nicely. You can add as many or as few lines as you like. The only thing you do have to make sure you do is go ahead and stitch on those crease lines, because that will again help the whole bag to stand up correctly. So even if you do no other quilting, which is totally fine too, you want to make sure you stitch along both crease lines, and then any additional quilting you want to do is bonus. So once this is done, we're going to go on to the next step. So step 2 is to make the outside pocket. There's 2 parts to the outside pocket. There's the pocket itself, and then there's a bit of a binding that also finishes the edges and helps you attach it to the bag. So its finished product is going to look something like this, where you have that binding over both edges. So let me show you how we do that. You've got the pocket piece, and then you've got this that you're going to fold in half lengthwise and press a nice crease. And then you're going to fold that and attach that up here, right along the edge of the pocket. And do that on both sides, and you're going to sew a 1/4 inch away on both sides. So now you've got this nice little flap. Once you have that flap, you're going to press that away so that the whole seam is going away from the pocket body. And I'm going to use the iron to do that. So pressing it away. And then I'm going to fold it over and we're going to stitch that down again. And that encloses the seam, so it gives you a really nice clean pocket edge. And you're going to do that on both sides. So when you do that, I found the easiest way is to flip it back to the front and stitch at about 1/8 of an inch or eyeball just close to the edge of this piece. And that's how you get this bottom edge. For the top edge, I went ahead and top stitched again. So you've got the same stitch I just showed you, and then another stitch right across here, because when we attach the pocket to the bag, we're going to go ahead and use that same space on the bottom. So what we like to do is make it look symmetrical and really intentional, so you finish the top edge to look like the bottom edge will look. So now we can attach this to the bag. So this is the quilted bag. You can see my marks and I quilted it. I'm going to choose one side, doesn't matter which one. And then I'm going to find my crease line, which is right here. And about 1/4 inch away from that, I'm going to place the bottom of this bag. And then I'm going to center it up. So again, this is very forgiving. You can kind of eyeball this, or you can measure specifically from either side. And there's some instructions in the pattern that are really nice and clear. One other thing I love about her pattern is that she puts in a red font when there's something that's like big important hint. So here's how you'll do that. And then you can pin that down. I'm just going to put one pin up here close to the top, and then you can stitch. So I'm going to show you what I meant about the stitching here. We're going to top stitch right along here. I say top stitch, but it's gone on the bottom, so maybe it's a bottom stitch. And that will be our pocket attached. So slide this in to our machine, line it up, and just stitch one nice row across the bottom. All right. Then we can baste up the sides. So I'm going to turn the whole piece and really close, so not 1/4 inch, it's going to be much less than 1/4 inch, right along the edge. I'm just going to stitch this down. The sides will be held on properly when we put the handles on in a later step. This just holds it in place so it doesn't flap around on us while we're doing other parts of this project. And then one more time. And sometimes people ask, like, how do you work with this? The foam is super flexible, super soft. You can just roll it up, scrunch it up, and get it out of your way. And I like to go from the bottom of the pocket to the top because I don't want to create any puckers. So that's why I'm not going to flip the whole thing around. I want to still go from the bottom to the top. All right, so that was super easy. That's our outside pocket attached and basted. So I can take this pin back out and that's all set to go. Next, we're gonna work on the lining. Okay, for the lining, we're gonna do a very similar setup, but it's gonna be ever so slightly different. So here's where to pay attention. You're gonna take your 2 lining pieces for the body and you're gonna seam them just like before and press that seam open. But we're not gonna right away turn the edge. First, we need to add the inside pocket. And that is gonna be a larger piece. You're gonna fold in half lengthwise. So hot dog fold, not hamburger. And then once you've got that pressed, you're gonna stitch really close to the edge. And this light fabric, it's really hard to see my stitches, but it's just right close to the edge and it can waver a little bit. This is not perfection, but it's pretty close. And so I just follow the edge. Now that I've got that, The other part is that we are going to have, again in the pattern, really clear instructions for how to measure this. You're going to make a marking on your lining on one side. So this is where the bottom of our pocket's going to be. I did this wrong the first time, and I put that marking on the inside of my lining, and I stitched my pocket to the inside of my lining. So do as I tell you, not as I did. Flip this around to make sure your seam is clean here, and then we're going to use that marking to line up the bottom of our pocket. So I'm going to show you here. There's the bottom of our pocket. I've just made a little tiny Sharpie mark in the edge that's never going to show anywhere. And you can use your favorite marking tool. I'm using a Sharpie partly so that you can see it because, again, this is a very light fabric. Once I've got this down, I'm going to stitch a 1/4 inch away all the way across. And this is where I find that pins are super helpful. So I'll go ahead and pin all the way down this edge. But one other tip I have for you is don't pin right at the edge. If I pin about 1 inch away all the way down, I can leave all those pins in when I stitch. I don't have to take them out, which holds everything nice and stable on this kind of weirdly spaced edge. So now I can go all the way down this edge with all my pins intact about 1 inch away, and my machine won't go anywhere near them. My needle is totally safe. So we'll stitch down this edge, and then I'll show you the trick to close that off and make that seam really nice. So now my pocket is sewn, step 1, and I'm going to press it away towards the top. But I don't want this raw seam to be raw, so once I have pressed this away, being gently and finger pressing it first, coming back along the edge and just kind of press it away. Now to enclose that seam, I'm going to stitch again just on the outside of that. So a little more than 1/4 inch away, we'll enclose that seam on the inside, and that pocket will never ravel. Okay, so let's take a look. It's a nice finished edge on the outside of the pocket. And when we peel this back, now all of that seam that was raw is encased, so it's not going to ravel when you go to wash this. So that's that part of the pocket. Again, just like on the outside pocket, we're now going to baste up the side right on the edge. And then once that's done, that's when we will finally do the fold of the 1/4 inch on both long sides all the way across. I've got that done already here, so you can see what that looks like. So we basted up the edge, and then when we turned it over to turn that 1/4 inch, you can see I kind of followed that same basted edge when I stitched a second time. And pins are also going to be your friend here in these bulky spots, because your machine may want to catch this pocket like mine did and pull it down. So I want to, you see, it's again very forgiving and it's not going to be a problem, but if this happens to you, it's okay. So I want you to see what it looks like. My pocket caught here on the edge when I was stitching down the 1/4 inch. This is eventually going to be caught in another seam, so it's not a big deal. And if it really bothers you, you can pick it out and have that stitched down again. But what I did was clip right there to hold it in place, and I stuck a pin right here to hold that so that the pocket didn't try to flip down. So once you've got both edges of your lining all cleaned up, now it's time for us to attach the two pieces, main body pieces together. So we're going to take this lining and fuse it to the foam. This is important to where the pocket is. So this pocket wants to be on the opposite side of the lining pocket. So my pocket is on my left on this, then this pocket is going to be on my right on this side so that we have a minimal bulk. Now, you can choose to add as many pockets as you want to your project. If you would like your bag to have both inside pockets and both outside pockets, go for it. This is just following the pattern as it's written. So once again, we're going to line this up so where the 1/4 inch overhang is on the side, on both edges, and the top and bottom is lined up nice and even. And then we will use our iron and fuse from the center. And again, one more time, now this is even easier to line up our center seam with our drawn line. So you can see they're off just a little bit. So just kind of maneuver that into place and start adding some clips. This is another spot where you might think, wow, this is a little bigger than the other side, or this is a little funkier. It's super forgiving. I can't say that enough because the project is going to work and come together into a really easy bag, regardless of whether that works the way you think it should perfectly. And so here's one thing that I'm trying to show you. So you can see my lining is actually slightly larger than the main body fabric of the outside. And why that happens is because when we quilted, it actually scrunched up just a little bit. That's fine. Don't worry about it. Don't try to trim anything. There's nothing wrong with that. We're just going to kind of center it on the side. Make sure our center seam is going to be even. And then we're going to press from the center out. So we'll smooth this. And we're going to take extra care to hold that iron over the pocket area because it needs to go through 3 layers of fabric to get to the foam and that fusible. So once we've got that done, I'll meet you back here and we'll do the next step. Okay, so once you've fused the lining to the foam, we're going to start with attaching the soft parts of the hook and loop tape. So I've done one side already and I'm going to show you how we do this. It's a 1/2 inch hook and loop tape and it needs to be about a 1/2 inch away from the raw edge. So you can kind of eyeball, like I've done here, roughly the width of the tape then away from the raw edge. And I've pinned this down several spots along the way. And again, this is the soft side. We're going to work with the scratchy side later. So I've centered this about a 1/2 inch away from both of these edges as well. And we're just going to kind of stitch that down. And what I'm going to do is come along this side, pivot, come across the short side, and then I'm going to come along this side. And again, this is all foam, so it's going to roll up and squish up and shove itself right through the throat of the machine, no problem. Very easy. So let me show you how we do that. Take a few stitches and you're going to make sure you don't go over your pins. And I'm kind of holding the extra weight of this so that it doesn't drag my needle right off my hook and loop tape. And I'm right along the edge, maybe 1/8 of an inch. Again, I'm not measuring. It doesn't have to be super perfect. And this soft edge is like butter. It is so easy to sew through. I'm going to give you a couple tricks for the scratchy side when we get that far. But this part's nice and easy. So needle down, pivot, take about 5-6 stitches, and then I want my needle down again to pivot. And I'm going to scrunch all this up and just kind of shove it right there. And then I'm going to, again, hold it and guide it through the long side. Needle down, pivot, And just a few stitches, and then I'm going to back stitch here at the end to lock that into place. And voila. So now that I've done that on both sides, this part is done. We're ready to do the handles, and then when we attach the handles to the outside of the bag, they will finish off this pocket, and we will be ready for the sides. So first up, handles. In our pattern, Fat Quarter Gypsy shows you how to make fabric handles, and you can follow that instruction, and it's beautiful, works great, and you can make them out of any fabric you like. What I'm going to do though is a little bit of a hack. I'm going to use Tulip Pink webbing by Renaissance Ribbons, and it is the right width for me, and it has that great handle quality, and I don't have to do any extra stitching to create the handles because they're really cool already. So I'm just going to show you how I'm going to attach these pieces to each other. In the pattern, you're creating something that's about 135 inches-ish, and that's for this larger bag. But the thing about handles is they can be a little bit larger, they can be a little bit smaller, so you can customize that to your size. These are each 2 yards long. So when I put 72 inches together twice, it's 144. That's not a big deal to me. I'm a little bit taller. I like a little bit more handle to my bag. If you want to trim them down to something smaller, what I'm going to recommend is that you trim both sides or both pieces the same amount so that eventually you don't have one that's longer than the other, because what we're going to do is use the seams as the center points for the handles. So I'm going to go ahead and leave these at their full length, but if you wanted to trim them down, again, you could trim a section. Just make sure you trim it off of both sections. Okay, so now we're going to attach these together. There's not a right and a wrong side, so I'm just going to decide which was which. And I'm going to put my right sides together, and then about 2 inches away, I'm just going to stitch a straight line. And this is where it's going to help to have a really nice sharp needle. I swear by the Microtex sharp needles because they will go through anything and everything, and a nice sharp needle at this stage and for that scratchy part of the hook and loop tape is super helpful. So here we go. And again, it's not a perfect system. It's just going to be a nice straight line. And you can backstitch. And now I've got this funky piece. Funky is my word of the day. So we want to clean up that edge by pulling one away, and then we're going to stitch again on this to hold that down. And it's okay if it ravels a little bit. What I'm going to do is kind of finger press. I don't want to take an iron to this, but I want to kind of just finger press and give that a little bit of a crease. And then I'm going to stitch about 1/4 inch away from this fraying edge. You can use a product called Fray Check also if you want to help this kind of clean up that edge, but it's going to be sewn to the bag, so it won't be a big deal. And this time I'm going to backstitch across the whole thing. So there's a lot of layers there. I'm going to take it nice and slow. And now I've attached these two together. And I can trim up all my threads. I want to do the same on the other side, but I want to make sure that both sides are now the right side out, because now I've created a right side to this. So the trick is that we're going to make one big loop. I'm going to hold that down with my wrong side up so that I can find the wrong side here and the wrong side here. And that way I make sure I'm putting my right sides together. And I'm going to confirm that. So now my right sides are together. I'm going to smooth the whole section of strap. And it should have my right sides together on the inside, and it does. So now I know I can do the same process on this side. So again, I'm about 2 inches away. I'm going to make a straight line stitch, seam, And then I'm going to skip the iron, but I'm going to kind of finger press that seam open, and I'm going to do the same direction. So if I went to the left before, I'm going to go to the left now. If I've gone to the right before, I'm going to go to the right now. So since I went to the right before, I'm going to go to the right now. And again, that's so that both seams will actually be symmetrical when we go to attach them to the bag. So it's a little brain hack. So now I'm going to stitch about 1/4 inch away from that. And I'm going to back stitch all the way across. And now I will just trim my threads and any fraying bits. Okay, so those are maybe the easiest straps I've ever made for a bag. And now we're going to use these seams that we've made to center our giant loop and create 2 handles as we attach it to the body of the bag. Let me show you what I mean. So once again, we've got the outside of our bag. When we attach the handles, it's going to attach the sides of the pockets firmly. But before we get started, we're going to flip back to the inside because we don't want this one to get all funky. So what I'm going to do is pin close to the edge and away from where the handles will be, and then somewhere in the middle, again away from where the handles will be, kind of eyeballing, to keep this pocket away, but give me room to stitch. So once that inside pocket is pinned away and is safe, come back to the outside. And you can see I've got clips here because I want you to see where my center seam still is, because that is now where we're going to line up our handles. Okay. This part's kind of magic. I super love when things just suddenly have that aha moment. So what we're going to do is take that seam we created and we're going to center it over the center seam, which you can kind of see here. And we're going to center the yellow part of this, or the center of this, over the pocket. And if you want to get out your ruler, there are measurements in the pattern for exactly where this should fall, and you can kind of pin or clip this in place. Now the fabric straps are very easy to pin. These are a little more complicated to pin, so I'm going to take my time and go through all the layers and try to bend my pin while I'm at it. And I've also found that safety pins can be super helpful for this step with this material. When we go up to sew this, we're going to need to know where to stop. And that is going to be the handy lines, you can kind of see my stitching, that we used to attach the soft part of the hook and loop tape. We're going to stop below or before that line. So as we stitch up about 1/4 inch away, we're going to stop and we're going to form an X, a box with an X, and that will hold that strap with a lot of security and stability. So I'm going to show you how that works, but first we need to make sure we've got both sides of the strap attached and pinned. So again, I'm going to take the other side, and now you can see it's mirrored, and I'm going to center that over this center seam and center that over the pocket. So I'm going to get this all pinned up, and then I'll show you how we stitch it and create the X. So now that I've pinned my handle in place, we're ready to stitch it. I want to be extra careful about the bulk over these seams because there's quite a bit of fabric and material here. I want to make sure I stop and make the X and inside the box to add stability to the handles of the edges. So let me show you real quick on a piece of paper how that's going to work. As I'm stitching along, as I come to the space that I want to make the X, I'm going to stitch up and over, and then I'm going to aim for a spot and make a diagonal, and then come back across, and then make a diagonal up to the top again. This will get stitched twice across the top, which just adds a little extra stitching and stability, and then I can come right down the edge and I've stitched down the handle. So I'll show you that now with the sewing machine. And I like to start somewhere here so that I can go over this space and finish on the long side as well. So I'm going to slide all this bulk under the machine. And pick a spot. And again, just right along the edge, about 1/8 of an inch. But you never see me getting out a ruler, it's just kind of eyeballed along the edge. And start sewing. Nice and slow as I go over this bulk. But you can hear my machine's not complaining. I'm taking it nice and slow, really sharp needle. And we continue down this. Now I'm going to kind of hold this taut. And let the machine pull it through. As I'm coming up to this row of stitches, which represents that soft part of the hook and loop tape, about 1/4 inch away, I'm going to stop. And I'm going to turn and pivot with my needle down. And make a nice straight line. And then with my needle down again, we're going to pivot. We're going to aim for a spot about 1 inch, 1.5 inches away down here. So right here, I'm going to decide that I'm going to aim for where this leaf and flower are coming together. And I'm going to make a diagonal line of stitching. So I'm going to fold all this up. Again, it's foam. It's fine. It's not hurting a thing. Pivot. All right, I'm going to aim for this spot. And once I've hit my other line of stitching, needle down, pivot the whole thing back around, and now we're going to make a straight line back towards us. And one more stitch. And again, needle down to pivot, and now I've got all the room behind my machine to move my fabric. I'm going to aim for this spot up here, this corner that we've already established. And stop when I hit that. Needle down, swing it around. And we're going to come right back across the top again. So back across the top. And then we're going to coast all the way down the side. So with the needle down, I'm going to take one more stitch. Needle down, we're going to turn the piece. Make sure the handle's out of your way. And you can roll and fold the foam as needed. And then we're just going to keep an eye on this pocket. We don't want the foot to catch it. So I'm going to kind of hold that in place. There we go. And we're off. As we come up to this bulky seam, we're just going to take it nice and slow. Not bad at all. And you can see because I pinned in the center of this, I don't even have to remove those pins to keep stitching. But now we're coming up on this other edge, so we need to make the box again. So I'm going to stop about 1/4 inch away with my needle down. I'll show you this one more time. We're going to pivot. We're going to stitch across the top. And then with needle down, we're going to choose a spot about 1.5 inches away. I'm going to now choose this spot here where this leaf meets the handle. This is the foldiest part. So I'm going to aim for that spot. And then with needle down, turn it back so I can stitch across the bottom. When I get to the edge, I'll throw the whole thing behind me. And I can aim for the corner we already made. And then with needle down, pivot across the top again, so that strengthens that top edge. And now we're going to sail down the other side to where we started. I'm just kind of holding the bulk away, letting the feed dogs pull the project through. So you can see from my thread here, this is where I'm going to stop. I'm going to cross over that just a little bit. And backstitch. And that side of the handle is done. So I'm going to do the other side of the handle, and then I'll meet you back here so we can make the sides of our bag. So the outside of our bag, the main body of our bag is done. So now I'm going to put this away to the side, and we're going to make the sides. Sides of our bag are made a lot like the front and back of our bag. Instead of putting the two pieces together and seaming them down the center though, what we're going to do is simply put that 1/4 inch fold over and stitch on 3 sides, leaving the top open on the outside fabric and again on the lining fabric. When we do that, we can take the same step as before if we'd like to quilt the foam. So you'd press your foam piece to your lining, lining it up, flipping it over, and pressing through the fabric to adhere that fusible foam to this outside. Then you can draw right on the foam, just like before, any kind of quilting lines that you want to make, and stitch along those lines. Once those quilted lines are on there, you're going to line up your lining piece and fuse that. So that's how you'll get these pieces. So you can see I've quilted when I had the outside and the foam together. And I can peel that back so you can see that. I drew my lines and stitched right along there. Then I fused my lining piece to the foam. And then, last step, just like before, we're going to attach the soft part of that hook and loop tape about 1/2 inch from the top of that exposed edge, and we can stitch it one big rectangle around, and that holds it through and quilts through all the layers. So you do that for both sides of your bag. Then it's time to assemble it. We're getting really close. So this is the part where there's a bit of a bravery test. Bob Ross is one of my favorite creators and makers. And at the end of some of his projects, he says, you know, you gotta be brave, and you gotta just take that step that you think is gonna ruin the whole thing, but actually makes it awesome. And that's what we're gonna do right now. We are gonna snip through our nice folded edges along the crease, on both crease lines on both sides of the main body of this bag. It's a bravery test, but it makes it so much easier to sew together. So to do that, I'm going to put the tip of my scissors where I want this snip to stop, and voila. And again here, put the snip where I want to stop, and I want it to stop basically where the foam is inside. So you know we have that 1/4 inch overhang. So I'm going to peel this back a little bit more than you will want to, so you can see. So I've got that 1/4 inch overhang. I'm going to stop at the foam. I'm not trying to snip through the foam. I'm going to snip to the foam through the fabric. Okay. Do that again on this side. And not at the center, but over here. And again, sometimes like the lining here is a little bit bigger. It's not a big deal. I'm just going to hold these together and snip to the foam, not through the foam. Okay. Big bravery test is over. Now we can take the side panels and we're going to find the center of them. Just kind of fold and make a crease and lay them right sides together with the seam of the center. And they should overhang the snip right where the foam is. I think you can see this here. So here's my snip, and you can see the foam stops at the snip, but there's overhang of the fabric. That's perfect. Same over here, the foam stops at the snip, but there's overhang of fabric. And I'm going to use a few clips because there's lots of layers, and I think the pins won't help me as much. I'm just going to pinch all the layers together and clip them in place. And we're going to sew these down snip to snip. So I'm going to do the other side here, and what's also fun and easy check for yourself is these should line up pretty close. So as I turn this around, I'm going to line this up again, snip to snip, and top edge to top edge, and we're pretty close. So you can see here's my snip and the foam. There's my center. I know that's my center because I've got that crease that I made that folded in half. And then here, I've got the overhang, the foam stops here. Okay, so if you sew from this side, it's gonna be really hard to tell exactly where to stop. So one of her great tips in the pattern is to flip this over and to stitch from the main body part of the bag. So what I'm gonna do is tuck this handle into this pocket here, flip this, tuck this into this pocket here, and that way I'm not going to stitch over my handles and they're safe. So as you can see here, now I can see my clips. So I'm going to stitch from clip to clip, snip to snip, and I can see everything on this side. So take this to the machine. We're going to use again a 1/4 inch seam. So we should be sewing kind of right along the edge of the foam. If you get a little bit of foam, not a big deal, but you're not trying to catch the foam exactly. Hope that makes sense. So right along the edge of the foam, and I'm going to start with my needle down right in the snip. I'm going to take a few stitches and then back stitch. And then we're going to stitch along. I'm just going to kind of help it because there's a lot of bulk. And then I'm going to keep an eye on it. So I'm stopping at the other snip that I made. So hold this with my fingers. Right up to that snip, and then we're going to back stitch. And that will have attached one side of the bag. So now I'm going to stitch the other side. Needle down, take a few stitches, back stitch, and we're off. And then keep an eye on this snip. All right, so now the sides are attached there. Now we're going to work on how to attach these sides to these sides. So I'm going to show you one, and then we will repeat on the other three. So where it starts to become a 3D flopsy bag of craziness, and that's totally what it's supposed to do right now. So remember, we have our handles tucked out of the way, and we're going to line up the tops of the bag. So even if there's a little extra at the bottom, don't worry about that. We're going to ease that in. So I'm going to find all of the tops and pinch them together and add a clip, because we want the top edge to be relatively even. And we're going to sew down this edge, grabbing all of the little fabric flaps that have stuck out past the foam. And because the inside pocket, which is the side we're working on now, has that extra bulk, I'm going to also add an extra clip there to help hold everything in place. Again, because I don't want to catch that pocket now that I'm stitching the sides together. Okay, you're going to come down here then to the snip. So see how the snip helped the fabric to turn the corner. And basically, you're going to pinch this together and stitch right off this edge. So we're going to start at the top edge and stitch down. Back stitch at the beginning. And again, I'm going to keep an eye on this pocket. I want to make sure I don't catch it. So I'm going to use my fingers to hold everything and guide it under the foot. Just take your time and kind of adjust the bulk as you need to, so that everything's comfortable and gravity's not working against you. And then we get down to this corner, we're going to stitch right off that snipped edge, and then back stitch a couple of times, and voila, now we have one corner of the bag. So I'm going to repeat that on the other three sides. Let me show you one more time how that works, and then I will meet you back here to finish the bag. So again, we're going to measure from the top, and we're going to make sure that is clipped in place. And then extra clips at the pocket fold. And I've got a pin in here because that again holds that pocket so it's less likely to wander. Just clip down the edge. And then we'll sew right off the edge and back stitch. Flip all the bulk away. Back stitch at the beginning, and then sew along the edge of the foam down the side. And I'm just holding it, I'm not tugging it, but I'm holding it because the bulk of this is trying to pull it back towards me. We get to the end, and back stitch, and now one half of our bag is attached. So I'm going to attach this other half, and then we'll come back for the last couple of steps. Okay, so now you have what she affectionately calls a big floppy bag mess. And that's okay, that's exactly what we're supposed to have at this stage. What we're going to do now is create the last piece that creates the pocket for the wireframe at the top that makes this wireframe tote. So let me show you how that part works. So the last step of our bag is to make the pocket that the wire frame actually sits in. And this has a couple of interesting steps. I can't give you all of the measurements, you'll want the pattern for that, but let me show you how it works because this is pretty great. The first thing we're going to do is add a layer of fusible stabilizer to the back of this fabric that we're choosing to use for that pocket flap. And then on the short sides, there's 2 long sides and 2 short sides, we're going to do some interesting measuring. So there's a diagram and instructions for how to measure this out, but you're going to create a different stitch line. So when we seam these together, they're going to create a seam that actually has this kind of crooked leg in it. And that helps it hold really securely when it goes around the wire frame. So to do that, we're going to draw that on, and then when we apply that here, we're just going to follow our stitched line instead of just taking a regular 1/4 inch seam. So let me show you how that works. It's even easier than it sounds. I'm just going to follow along my drawn line. And I will pivot and kneel down and pivot. And you're going to do that as you attach each short side to each long side. And that's it. So it's really easy. I'm going to show you one more time on this side. And sometimes that stabilizer doesn't stay fused, that's okay. It's still going to do its job really well. We want to make sure this loop doesn't have any twists and turns in it. And then we're going to follow that line to make a big circle. This was so snazzy, and you're gonna love this, because as we trim and press this flat, it forms a really great shape. Okay, so now to trim this, I'm going to kind of aim for the center. I'm going to clip away the excess. So we've just got a 1/4 inch seam. So I'm kind of trimming that little triangle away. And now I'm going to clip in on the corners. So again, I'm going to put my scissors where I want it to stop so I don't clip through my stitches. And here, here, and here, I'm going to clip. So I'll show you again. Clip, clip, clip. And we're going to do that on all 4 of them. Now here's the real fun trick, is how do you, she says, press open as best you can. Okay, here's the trick. I'm going to open these up, and it's not flat anymore, right? But I'm going to put one side flat at a time, and using my fingers to peel this open. The clips are going to help me let this lay flatter than it would. And I'm just going to kind of rub the tip of my finger or my fingernail up there. Then I'm going to kind of turn this, and now it's okay. That it's totally okay it's doing that. We want that to do that. I'm going to peel this open and do the same, kind of flatten that seam open. So it's a super weird shape, but it's perfect. So we're going to bring these 2 ends together like this, and where those seams meet, we're just going to clip, and we're going to go all the way around the circle, because when it's done and it's pressed in half, like so, it forms that little hook, and that is perfect. So I've already done that on this example, and then this is where we're going to add the hook and loop tape scratchy side. So just like before, you're going to stitch around the outside of it in a rectangle. This time, instead of 1/2 inch away from the raw edge, you're going to stitch it about 1/4 inch away from the folded edge. So again, you're going to look at this, and you can eyeball it, and it's about 1/2 the width of the hook and loop tape. And you're going to center it between the seams, and you're going to stitch it down. Again, this is where you want a nice sharp needle, and if your thread breaks at all, blame it on the hook and loop tape. Sometimes that will happen, it'll get caught in those hooks. So I also recommend making sure you have plenty of bobbin thread, because you don't want to get around this and find out you lost bobbin chicken. So once you get the long pieces on the long pieces, the short pieces on the short pieces, and make sure that they're all on the inside, right, or the outside, but they're all on the same side of the circle. Now we're ready to do the last step, and that's to attach this to our bag. Okay. This is another exercise in patience. So this may be ever so slightly bigger than this. It's all going to ease in, so don't worry about it. Again, this is super flexible. It's going to work. What you're going to do is start with either a long side or a short side. I like to start with a long side. I'm going to take these 2 seams. I'm going to line up the raw edges with the bag. I want the hook side, the sticky side, scratchy side of the hook and loop tape outside, so it's right sides together with the outside of the bag. So I'm going to line up this seam here, and the corner of the seam is going to travel a little bit. So we're just going to worry about the top, and I'm going to put clips on both sides of the seam, and then I'll go on here and do the same on this side, just at the seam. And then we'll ease it in. Okay. So this is the part where you can see there is more bag than there is pocket flap. That's actually perfect. We're going to ease it in a little bit. I know I keep saying that, but here's how. We're going to take the center, or roughly center, and line them up with a clip. Make sure we get all layers. And then we're going to kind of scrunch this together. And we're going to add a couple more clips. And we are going to sew with the inside of the bag on the bottom as we stitch, because the feed dogs will help us take in this little bit of extra material. So we're going to do the same thing all the way around the bag, and I'll meet you back here and show you how to sew it down. Now that I've clipped all the way around, we're going to do one big circle of stitches, and that will complete the project. You can, if you want to, at the end, also add some bias tape to finish that edge. It's not a part of the pattern, but it can create a last finished edge. But we're going to just sew about 1/4 inch away from the edge. And again, I'm going to kind of smoosh this as I need to. Technical term, I know, but we're going to smoosh this away and line this up under the machine. And about 1/4 inch away, again, doesn't have to be perfect. Take a more generous seam rather than a less generous seam if you're nervous about it. And away we go. Because the larger fabric is on the bottom, the feed dogs are taking in a little bit more of that material for us. So it's just easing it right in. I'm just going to take my time and just kind of adjust the smooshing of the bag so I have a nice flat edge to stitch along. And again, you want to keep your handles out of the way. And I'm just kind of pivoting a little bit at the corners and letting the bag know it's not the boss. I'm the boss. It's gonna go where I tell it. Okay. So we get back to where we started. I'm gonna backstitch and secure the stitches. And the fabric part of our bag is done. Now we just have to add the wire tote. So I'm gonna go in here and make sure I've snatched out all of my pins because I don't want to poke myself anymore. All right, so the last part then is attaching the wire. It's going to sit into this tote and then the hook and loop tape closes in on itself and we're good to go. So I have the large tote bag wire frame. And it also comes with this super cute tag, which you can trim and stitch into any of your seams on a pocket, on the handle. It's super cute to add. Voila. All right, so I'm gonna try to do this in a way that works for you to see it and for me to not fling it at you. But you're gonna set this inside your bag, and then you're gonna find the corners, and you're gonna just kind of fold that hook and loop tape over. And you set it into the corner, fold that over, and secure it on one side. And then you kind of turn, and do the same on the other. So you're gonna set this into the corners, fold your hook and loop tape over. So I'm gonna set it there. It's easier to do if you're looking at it. See that? And voila! We made a wireframe tote bag with its super cool handles, super cute pocket, and this will hold all your favorite goodies. We've used this one to hold our quilt and our picnic goodies so we can go anywhere we'd like and have a lovely retreat. So I hope that you do make this bag. Show us the bag that you make using hashtag MSQC show and tell. Remember, this is the wireframe tote from Fat Quarter Gypsy. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial from the Missouri Star Quilt Company.